Spears be who she was, I thought, well, I can do that. So I figured I would take this year off to start auditioning. But how do you pay your rent in a place like Manhattan when you're 21 years old? You bartend. So I picked that up. I also went back to school because school was a really safe place for me. I'm a hardwired perfectionist. So school is the perfect environment, highly curated, right? If this, then that. If you study, you'll get a good grade. If you get a good grade, you'll get your degree. And if you get your degree, nobody can take it from you. And in my house, academics were really important. My mom knew that I loved to sing and dance. But she said, that's not a surefire way to a stable life. So I had that voice in the back of my head. And I had a dad, he was around, but by the time I was a teenager, he was living in the basement. So my mother's word ruled. And she was having an extramarital affair on my dad, and she was super angry at all the things he had done, and my dad was pretty emotionally absent. I loved him, but he didn't know how to show up for me with all my teenage angst. He did support my dreams to be a star, but his presence was so muted in my house, and my mother took up so much space. She said things like, terrible husband, great father though. The only person you can count on is yourself. And the people who believe in God, they're fools. So here I am, 21 years old, tossed between wanting to be a star, auditioning, bartending, hustling to pay my rent, and also going to school because it was so safe and so comfortable. And as I was bartending, my drinking was really picking up. But the thing is, I grew up in a house where my mom abused prescription pills, whether she was having a good day or a bad day. So that stuff was normal to me. Surely I could drink and put it down and look great the next day and get an A on the test and keep the job and keep the boyfriend, by the way, that I now had while I was living in the city. Right? And then cocaine got introduced to me. And it didn't do anything for me the first time. There we are.
I was like, those New York winters.
But you know, I was curious. I also had a sister who was experimenting with sex, with all the genders, with all the types of drugs, and so trying cocaine again wasn't a big deal. And eventually I realized, man, if I drink too much behind the bar, I could just do some cocaine. And then I'm super high functioning. Lather, rinse, repeat. So I was in this cycle of dabbling in the entertainment industry, going to school, bartending. I also really loved movement as a dancer. And I thought, well, maybe I'll do some part-time personal training. Maybe I'll have a career in exercise if all this stuff fails. And I met this guy named Bobby. He was from Hell's Kitchen. You guys know where that is?
Yep.
Yeah. But he was from Hell's Kitchen when it wasn't trendy, when it was dangerous. And he would tell me these crazy stories about his life and his dad, who was part of the Irish mob. And I remember when we were boxing in the gym, he told me that he opened the door to the man that killed his father when he was 13. He also told me that he was 22 years sober from heroin. I had never met anybody who was sober from anything. Noted. He was a really cool guy with big, beautiful energy, but Bobby came and went. You know, he was just passing through in my desire to be a star. And all the while, I kept going to school, and I couldn't fully commit to the entertainment thing. It just felt so risky, and every rejection as a hardwired perfectionist just crushed me. I was 21, but I had absolutely no inner template for resilience. And so I kept going to school. Eventually, I thought, wow, physical therapy is so much more prestigious than personal training. I'll have a doctor in front of my name. My mom will be so proud. So I went to school for even longer for that. And I was teaching dance and I was dabbling a little bit, but really, entertainment took a back seat. And then I got my acceptance letter to this doctoral program, the school of my dreams. And I knew exactly how I was going to celebrate. So I called this girl I had met one other time, particularly because she partied like I did. So I knew she would co-sign, my addiction, although at the time I would never have called it that. So she came over, it was Christmas time in New York City, and we called the cocaine dealer. It was 2 p.m., perfectly good time to start getting loaded. And we did a whole bunch of lines, and then we went all over the city, shopping. All the lights were twinkling, just gathering up bags on our forearms, stopping in the bars to drink, to level out, and then doing more cocaine. Eventually, we got back to my house, and by house, let's be honest, we're talking about a New York City walk-up apartment that could barely fit one person, but we had 3 in it, filled with roaches and mice on occasion, and we were going to keep going. And I started to feel off, like brain fog had come over me. And she was so busy wrapping the presents, and also she didn't know me, so I didn't feel very comfortable saying, something's funny here. So I went into my room to mind my own business, and I got the remote to watch the TV, and the next thing I know, I'm on the floor of my bedroom on my side. And I come to, and my gaze goes from horizontal to vertical, and she's standing over me on the phone in a panic, calling 911, trying to tell them where I live, but she didn't know where I lived because we weren't really friends. And I immediately knew something awful must have happened. And that perfectionist inside of me, that controller, snapped right into gear. Get off the phone right now. The next day was Christmas Eve. I was not going to be found out. Whatever happened, nobody is going to know. Somehow I convinced her to get off the phone. We called a mutual friend to come over to keep the peace, but what I found out is that I overdosed. And I was convulsing and seizuring on the floor, and in an effort to not have me choke, she was pulling my tongue out of the back of my throat after she turned me onto my side. Apparently I was swatting her away, and I had a big cut across my chin. And the only thing I thought was, how do I keep this a secret? And the next day, I called Bobby because I remembered he was sober. And I said, I think I have a problem. He's like, all right, kid, let's go. I'll take you to a meeting. Okay, so he takes me to an AA meeting. Also, I'm not an alcoholic. I just have a little cocaine problem, but okay. So I go to the meeting and I sit in the back of the room with my arms crossed and I'm like, not like you, not like you, not like you. I don't drink like you. I don't look like you. I have all my shit together. I'm going to be a doctor, for God's sakes. I just have a little cocaine problem. Thanks, Bobby. This is not for me. So for the next year and a half, I did what addicts do. I just cut and paste. Instead of abusing uppers that might give me a heart attack and kill me, I just switched to downers. And I had a boyfriend. We were living together. And by now, he knew something was up. He was down to party with me until one day he just wasn't. And on that day, I declared internally, well, sucks for you, because I'm just getting started. So in this period in our relationship, we just smoked a lot of weed. And then my dad, whose role in the family dynamic was enabler, who had been giving me and my mom and my sister prescription medication for decades, he would just drive into the city and refill my prescription that was never prescribed to me. And I would black out half the time and not remember what I said, but it was better than seizuring and convulsing on the floor from cocaine. But one day, a year and a half into me hiding this part of my addiction, I moved the prescription pill bottle from this strange canister it was sitting in our bathroom, to our shared sock drawer, me and the guy I was living with. So Percy found it, and he pulled it out of the drawer, and he looked at me with disgust. And his look matched the shame that I already felt, the same shame that I had felt when my friend was hovering over me, trying to get the ambulance to come to my house. And in that moment, not only did I know I was losing control, pretty clear on that, I was losing him. And without him, I was nothing and no one. So I called Bobby again. Hey, Bobby, I think I need to go back to a meeting. Because if I don't figure this out, if I don't figure it out, like a good perfectionist, I think this guy's gonna leave me. All right, kid, let's go. So he took me to another meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. But alcohol's not my problem. And I sat in the back with my arms crossed and I othered myself to death. And I said, not like you, not like you, not like you. And I heard the language of the steps. I heard the word God, and I remembered my mother's words. They lived on in my nervous system. There is no such thing as God. God is for the stupid. God is for the vulnerable, the weak. The only person you can count on is yourself. So I hated the steps, but I felt like I had no choice, so I just followed Bobby around Manhattan. And I said, look, I know I'm supposed to be working with a woman in this 12-step thing, but you're the only person I'm going to listen to. Will you sponsor me? Sure. So we went to meeting. He knew I didn't believe in God. He said, don't worry. Just borrow my faith until you have some of your own. Okay. And he took me through the steps pretty quick. I think he knew that I was 1 foot in and 1 foot out, and that if he didn't hurry, I might relapse. So we did the best we could, never believing in a God of my own understanding. But we did some work, did some inventories, saw some patterns that were causing me pain, gained some fresh insights. And at this time, I was well into graduate school, by the way, becoming a doctor. And I had this opportunity to come to California. The guy I was dating really wanted to move here. I wasn't so convinced, but I thought, wow, if we go to LA, I might be able to be a star after all. And a physical therapist. So I had this chance to go to Cedars-Sinai and to do a clinical rotation. Super prestigious, right? And then when I wasn't doing that, I could audition. Things were going so well. But before I left, Bobby was acting weird. Just a little distant, not quite as bright as he used to be. And I thought, I think we just need to be friends. I don't know what's going on with you, but I don't want our friendship to be compromised, because we were friends before we were anything else. So I'll just get a temporary sponsor. And I did. And as all these cool things were happening out here in LA, I wanted to tell Bobby about it. And I would call and I would call, and he would not pick up. And I was so angry, so resentful, that his ego was so big that I wanted to go back to being friends, that he couldn't even pick up his phone until finally his wife picked up and said, Samantha, Bobby relapsed. That's why you haven't heard from him. The idea of Bobby relapsing was unimaginable to me. He was not the person that relapsed. He was the person that was showing me recovery was possible. So I couldn't wait to get back to New York and look him in the eye and find out what happened. So I got back and I met up with him right away. And I kept saying, "What happened, Bobby? I don't understand. I had a shoulder surgery. I got a staph infection. They gave me Oxy. My wife is such a pain in the ass. I just want to get divorced. Bobby, did you relapse or not? I don't understand. You're the one lighting the way for me." I don't know what to tell you, Sam. I met up with him one other time after that. He had a sling around his arm. He wanted help cleaning up his apartment, so I helped him. But I felt so uncomfortable. He was supposed to be my mentor. And now I'm cleaning up his dirty laundry, and I thought, I can't be around him right now. And 2 weeks later, this sober friend of mine called me. She said, "Where are you right now?" "Home? What's the matter? This sounds serious. I need you to stay where you are. I'll be right over." So she comes over, sits on my couch, puts her hand on my forearm, and she says, "Bobby's dead. He jumped out of his 8th-story window." 2 young, sober women, overwhelmed with grief. And here's what I learned in that moment. Addiction does not discriminate. It does not care if you have 50 days or 50 years. If you slip, it can smell your vulnerability. It will hunt you down and leave you for dead. So in that moment, I knew that if I relapsed, I was dead. But those steps weren't going to work for me. So what did I do? I ran for 4 more years on my hardwired perfectionism. What does that look like? Controlling everyone and everything. Remember, in school, that works perfectly. When you're a type A, you become the most culturally productive and spiritually bankrupt human on earth, if you're not careful. And that really worked for me until that guy that I was dating, who found the prescription pill bottle, he became my fiance and then my husband. In hindsight, we should have taken a break. We should have gone to therapy. We had a lot of healing to do before we got married, but we jumped. We made the leap, and I thought, oh, thank God he didn't leave me. Thank God. And then, in the early years of our marriage, he pulled away emotionally. He would go out of town a lot. He would leave his ring on the counter. He would reject me physically. He was always busy with his friends, and the more he pulled away, the more I was sure I could control him. Please, just go to 12-step meetings. Just go to therapy. You're angry. I get it. I hurt you. I cheated on you a lot in the front end of my addiction, but I'm sober. I'm different now. You married me, for God's sake. No matter what I said, no matter what I did, I don't know what to tell you, Sam. You did this. If you're cheating on me, just let me know. Because that would actually make sense. I'm not the cheater. You are. What could I say to that? I was running on an empty program. I was physically abstinent. But spiritually, I was armed with nothing except the tools that I had grown up with, which were really limited when it came to matters of the heart. And the fighting got so bad And I was sober enough to know that if I stayed in this situation, I might relapse. And I knew if I relapsed, I would die like Bobby did, and I didn't want to die. So I couch surfed for what I thought would be a weekend or two. Turned out it was 8 months, sleeping in different people's apartments, until finally, after begging him so many times, "Can I just come back home? Have you forgiven me yet? Can't we just be happy?" Finally, my girlfriend said, "You need to find a place that is your own. If you are not ready to leave this marriage, you've got to heal because you are not okay." So I signed a lease. Terrifying, okay? I was 30, I was married, but I had never lived alone. I was a grown-ass woman with a doctorate. I had no idea how to self-soothe. I had a mattress on the floor in an empty apartment that I eventually had to furnish. And I laid back and looked at the ceiling and I thought, what am I gonna do now? Somebody always strokes my head to sleep. I can't even put myself to sleep without anesthetizing my pain. And a little voice said, you're gonna have to wrap your arms around yourself and hug yourself to sleep. Kind of awkward, but I did it. I sobbed and I held myself to sleep. I had had many sponsors between Bobby and that moment, none of whom really did it for me. I still hated the language of the steps. I still didn't believe in God, but I was pretty miserable. And this woman walked into my life at the right time and she said, what if we do the steps on your marriage? Interesting. What do you mean? Well, you're not about to go out and call the cocaine dealer. Perhaps if we don't treat this spiritual malady for long enough, you will. But in the meantime, what if you were powerless over your marriage? And all the ways that your husband is behaving or not behaving. And when you try to exert power over it and him, to make him love you and make him forgive you so you can be okay. When you try to do that, when you exert control over something you are powerless over, your life becomes unmanageable in the following ways. Where's the scroll? The list was long. I had constant anxiety, ruminating and obsessing about how to make somebody forgive you after you betrayed their trust. I had no access to peace or power, the kind that comes from inside of you, and I had no sense of worthiness. And all of a sudden, step 1 in the 12 steps made a lot of sense to me. So that's what we did. We went through the steps with no religious intonation whatsoever. We made them practical. We made them fresh and modern, and eventually we got to the 9th step, which is making an amends. I had made so many amends. I was 5 years sober. I had hurt lots of people. I had even made amends to the family members who most offended me in my life. And she said, have you ever made an amends to yourself? I'm sorry, what? I told you guys I'm a hardwired perfectionist. Self-compassionate language is not part of my vocabulary. In fact, I run most efficiently out there in the world when I'm criticizing myself. Keeps me in line, gives me the A, gets me the job. The idea that I could forgive myself for any past behavior, especially hurting my now husband, was unimaginable to me. It was a game changer. And by the way, forgiveness, for anyone who's practiced it, is just that. It is a practice. It is not linear. It is not as if I stood in front of a mirror and said, I forgive you, Samantha. I love you. No. But I made a start. I made a start. And that was a big deal. And eventually things with my husband seemed to be shaping up. My lease was drawing to a close. And we were going to move back in together. And I thought, oh my God, this is it. This is what needed to happen. It makes so much sense. I needed to heal. I needed to love myself without him in order for us to be okay. Don't you wish you could just tie that story up in a bow? Oh. And I moved back in. And the most striking thing about moving back in was that I was different, but he was the same. There was an emptiness in his eyes, just like Bobby after he relapsed. He turned away from me. He rejected me physically. And I knew it wasn't about me anymore. And I stayed in the house for 3 weeks. And then I said, I don't want to do this with you. I deserve better. He dropped to his knees and he wailed like a dying animal, begging me to stay. And my intuition and I had become friends. See, when I did that 9th step and I started to speak to myself in a kinder and more compassionate way, I could hear the whisper of my intuition, which today, 15 years sober, I now call God. I've untangled myself from any religious intonation that word had over me. And my intuition said, you're going to find out everything you need to know. And I thought, I think I believe her. So I stayed a little bit longer in that house. And my husband was going on some elaborate trip again. And I thought, have fun. Because I knew he was lying. And eventually he came back home and he collapsed on top of me and he said, you're going to be the mother of my children one day. He seemed so tired. And the next day, in that apartment where I signed a lease, see, I kept it. I was very smart. I started a business because I was renting in this residential commercial mixed-use building. And I thought, I'm going to hang on to that. I'm going to start seeing patients privately. So I went to that old apartment, now my workspace, 9th Street in Wilshire in Santa Monica. And I get a ping in my email. And it's so long. And it starts by saying, you have to help me get rid of him. I know you told me to leave you alone, but we have to do this together. Followed by photographs, text messages, ticket stubs, a whole life that my husband had built with this other woman for 5 years, on and off. You see, when I was cheating on him, he didn't know how to leave me. He was a really good codependent. He loved me, but I was a raging addict. So he got his revenge, cheated on me, and figured that would be his way out. And then I got sober. I put a wrench in his plans. So he kept her at bay for a while. And then, in the early years of my sobriety, while I was really demanding, wanting him to go to therapy and 12-step meetings, he opened that door back up. And that was it. For the next several years, he was struggling to keep her at bay so I wouldn't find out. And she said, well, if you don't come see me, I'll just tell Sam everything. Her stuff's all over the internet. I'll just call her. I'll show up at your house in LA. So he was trapped in this terrible web of lies. And it drove him mad. So, when I found out, I did what any good wife would do. I threw his shit out of the house and said, "Goodbye, I've done the deal. Thank you very much." And I said, "I'm living here now. You go find a place to live."